Based on reports from students who took the LSAT, it's clear that LSAC is, in fact, changing the logical reasoning section. They're making it a bit harder. They are clearly including more formal logic questions within conditional reasoning on the scored portions of the logical reasoning sections. I'll walk you through all the recent changes and what they mean for your LSAT prep going forward if you're taking the LSAT in September or beyond. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, for some background, the June LSAT was the last LSAT ever containing the logic games section. LSAC instead replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning for those taking the LSAT this past August and beyond. Now, LSAC officially says they're not making any formal changes to the logical reasoning section, but it is clear that they are shifting the proportion of questions involving formal logic, involving conditional reasoning, testing your understanding of numbers versus percentages on the logical reasoning section going forward. Because they can't test these concepts in the logic game section anymore, since there is no longer any logic game section. But to LSAC, the validity of the test is the most important thing to them. It always has been. It's why they've always been so opposed to anyone using unofficial LSAT questions and why they are so big on releasing actual official LSAT practice tests, because they don't want to leave a vacuum in the market for folks publishing fake LSAT questions. And so to LSAC, part of what makes the LSAT a valid and reliable admissions test with strong predictive validity is that it tests these concepts. And so if they can no longer test them in the logic game section, they instead want to test them more in the logical reasoning section. And so, long story short, if you are taking the LSAT in September or beyond, you're going to want to brush up on your understanding of these important concepts. These questions have always been on the LSAT going back decades, but we may see a whole lot more of them in September and beyond. Test takers reported they saw more of these than they had on their practice tests, and the unscored extra sections contained even more of them, which means that LSAC is going to increase the prevalence of these questions on scored portions of the LSAT going forward. Now, when I say formal logic, when I say conditional reasoning, when I say numbers and percentages, what exactly do I mean? Let me give you a couple of examples from previous LSAT prep tests going back decades. Now, I'm going to use the old LSAT numbering system from 1 to 94 simply because I'm personally a whole lot more familiar with it. And I know that a lot of you are still using that numbering system. But for anyone using the new numbering system from 101 to 158, you can just Google the question topic to find the citation for the new LSAT format. And so we have from prep test 30, which was 25 years ago, an inference question involving inspired musical performances as the topic. This question involved lots of conditional reasoning, lots of conditional statements where diagramming would likely be useful. From prep test 44, we had a flaw question testing your understanding of numbers versus percentages involving Clara Schumann, who plays the piano. We have a question from prep test 53, which was a parallel reasoning question involving April rainfall, where diagramming would likely be useful. And then we have a question from prep test 58, which was a sufficient assumption question involving handmade wigs. Again, diagramming would likely be useful here. Now, if you're aware of the reason why LSAC removed the logic game section, you may be surprised to hear me say that diagramming would likely be useful. And that's because, for those who aren't aware, the reason LSAC removed the logic game section was because they were sued by blind test takers who contended that they were at an unfair disadvantage because they couldn't benefit from diagramming the way other test takers could. And so LSAC settled that lawsuit, agreeing to develop a new version of the test without the logic game section. And so you might be wondering, why is LSAC including more questions in logical reasoning that involve diagramming, or at least where diagramming could be useful? That's because if we look at the exact wording of the press release announcing LSAC's joint settlement agreement with the plaintiff's attorneys, LSAC never agreed to stop testing questions involving diagramming. They simply agreed to develop a new version of the test without the then current logic game section. So while LSAC is adhering to the letter of the law that they agreed to, they may not be adhering necessarily to the spirit of the law if they are including more questions involving formal logic, more questions where diagramming could be useful. Now, do you absolutely need to create a diagram to solve these questions? Of course not. You could probably do a lot of them in your head, but don't let that stop you from diagramming if you're able to, and if diagramming would be useful for you. You do get scratch paper on the LSAT. They give you more than enough scratch paper for both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. We'll see what happens if the test format changes going forward. But for now, it seems logical reasoning is here to stay, reading comp is here to stay, and we may be seeing a whole lot more of these questions in the near future. Now, if you'd like my help preparing for the LSAT whenever you're taking it, if you're concerned about these logical reasoning questions or any others, there are a wide variety of ways that I could support you. At LSAT Unplugged, we offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now, the questions I cited here before from prep test 30, 44, 53, and 58, these were inference, flaw, parallel, and sufficient assumption, respectively. So make sure you brush up on these question types. The most common question types on logical reasoning, however, currently are inference questions, flaw questions, and necessary assumption. So you'll notice here, necessary assumption is not from one of my examples. Diagramming is not going to be relevant for necessary assumption questions, but it could be useful for both inference questions and flaw questions in some cases, especially those involving formal logic. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. I hope you found the video helpful. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.